Today on Little Wars TV, we exhume the corpse of Ridley Scott's most recent historical epic, Napoleon. Reviews for the film when it premiered last November were mixed at best. The fiercest criticism came from the professional and armchair historian crowd, who roasted the movie for its blatant inaccuracies. No, Austerlitz was not fought in a blizzard. No, the French did not fight from the high ground. And no, Napoleon did not trick the Austrians into crossing a frozen lake so he could break the ice with cannonballs. None of that happened in 1805. Did anyone involved in this film even bother to read the Wikipedia entry on the battle? But I digress. Because actually, in today's video essay, we are not going to dwell on the historical inaccuracies of Napoleon. Plenty of other articles and videos have picked apart the film's scenes over the last few months, so there's just no need to retread those points. Instead, I want to explore a far more interesting question, and one that I wish more people would talk about. How could this film be fixed? Is it even possible to tell the life story of Napoleon in a single movie? If not, what could have been done instead? In today's video essay, I accept this challenge, and will rewrite the movie to deliver Sir Ridley a far superior script. But before we tear up the original screenplay and start over, we need to perform a quick autopsy on the 2023 theatrical version. What worked? What didn't? And how can we take a life as big as Napoleon's and distill that into a single film? Let's start our autopsy by stating the obvious. Napoleon is a bad movie. I hate to say that because I love Ridley Scott's work. I've seen just about everything that he has made, and I'd rank Napoleon near the very bottom of his filmography. Exodus, Gods and Kings is truly the bottom, but I'd put Napoleon down there probably second to last. Even Robin Hood manages to be a better movie by virtue of the fact that it has some kind of serviceable plot. As a huge fan of Napoleonic history, I wanted to love this film. But the moment it was first announced, I was worried. I'll explain why in a moment. There are three primary reasons why Napoleon does not work as a film: the subject matter, the scope, and the writing. Let's start with the subject matter, which is right in the title of the movie. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of the most famous, studied men in the history of Western civilization. During his own lifetime, he flat out told people that he wanted to be ranked next to Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. And frankly, mission accomplished. This is why I said a moment ago that I was worried when Ridley Scott first announced his intention to make a film about Napoleon, which he then called Kitbag as the working title. Here's the thing, I am a Ridley Scott fanboy, so I have seen all of his movies, and he enjoys historical settings: The Duelists, Conquest of Paradise, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, Kingdom of Heaven, The Last Duel. He likes using history as a backdrop for his stories. But if you've seen any of these films, then you know that Ridley isn't one to let facts get in his way. He's always been happy to take liberties with history if it serves a better narrative or presents him cooler visuals. And I've always been okay with that, because by and large his stories and his visuals are excellent. Gladiator is one of my favorite movies of all time. I make no apologies for that. It's set during the reigns of Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, two real-life Roman emperors. But we don't know that much about these men historically, and the main character is a totally fictional Roman ex-general. So this gave Ridley Scott and his scriptwriting team a lot of room to play in a historical sandbox without too many limitations. And even with that open sandbox, Gladiator still plays very fast and loose with the history that we do know. Because we know how the real Commodus died, and it was not in the gladiatorial arena. That makes for an awesome ending to the movie, but it is a total subversion of history. Here's why that worked. First, it's a change made in service to the story. And second, to be honest, nobody knows or really cares that much about Commodus as a historical figure. That is precisely why Napoleon was always going to be bad subject matter for a director like Ridley Scott, who has never been a stickler for historical details. Napoleon is just, well, too famous. A vast trove of primary sources survive from his life. Everybody wrote about him at the time, and it seems that 1,000 books have been written about him since. We know a lot about this man, from his childhood all the way through his death, with alarming levels of documented detail. Ridley Scott, the filmmaker, was always going to struggle under the weight of these well-established historical shackles. In interviews following the premiere, he was very irritable when questioned. He told one historian to get a life, and then he defended the film by saying this: "I've done a lot of historical films. I find I'm reading a report of someone else's report, 100 years after the event. How accurate is it? I say, were you there? That's the f***ing answer." Ridley, if you're going to make a movie about the life of one of the world's most famous figures, don't be surprised when people criticize you for falsifying major events. "You weren't there" is the kind of answer a toddler gives you when you accuse them of splattering food on the kitchen floor. It's a lazy excuse to rewrite the past, and unlike the ending of Gladiator, the historical revisionism in Napoleon rarely serves or enhances the story. Adding trenches and scoped sniper rifles to Waterloo doesn't make the battle any more interesting or dramatic. It makes you look clueless and ignorant about one of the most famous documented battles in world history. The second source of trouble in the film is the scope of the story being told. Napoleon's legendary life is just so big. It's packed with drama, personalities, feuding family members, rivals, battles, political intrigue, betrayal, and accomplishments. The notion that anyone could summarize such a life in a single movie always struck me as a really bad idea. You're not even going to be able to scratch the surface in 2 or 3 hours. The fact that this movie tries to cover Napoleon's entire career sets the film up for failure. It's too ambitious to be done in a satisfying manner. The screenplay writer admitted as much in interviews. I don't think there's any way that in the format of a feature film that you can possibly tell the entirety of this story. Right. Agreed. So why did you proceed to try and do exactly that? Cramming nearly 30 years of Napoleon's life into a 2.5-hour movie. You apparently knew it was impossible, but you did it anyway. Ridley Scott has already said he intends to release a much longer 4-hour director's cut streaming on Apple+. I'll absolutely watch it. The Kingdom of Heaven director's cut is way better than the theatrical version. But I still don't think 4 hours is enough to tell the life story of Napoleon. I also have very little faith in the Apple Plus cut for another reason, and it's our third primary issue with the movie. Take a good look at this poster. Do you notice that name on the bottom? David Scarpa. Who is David Scarpa, you ask? Well, that would be the screenwriter that I quoted a moment ago. If you haven't heard of him, you're not alone. Allow me to share Mr. Scarpa's screenwriting resume with you. No, these aren't the highlights. No, that's all of it. 3 credits in almost 2 decades of work. To be fair, I suspect Mr. Scarpa has plenty of uncredited work under his belt, including rewrites or unproduced scripts. He's also somewhat of a hot ticket in Hollywood right now, working on multiple feature scripts at the moment, so I don't want to pretend he's a writer of no experience. But as we're about to see, he clearly was not the correct choice for this project. It's important that we address the art of screenwriting because the characters that you see in a movie or on the television screen are only as clever or as complex as the people writing them. And Ridley Scott is a director, not a writer. If you look back at some of his best work, these movies were written by award-winning veteran writers. I love each of these films, and guess what they all have in common? Academy Award-nominated writers. No director, not even Sir Ridley Scott, can escape a bad script. You can only polish a turd so well. And yes, I'm calling David Scarpa's Napoleon merit. It's a collection of scenes, smashed together with no connective tissue or context. You get the impression watching this film that Scarpa Googled Napoleon and just started typing, which as it turns out, isn't too far from the truth. Scarpa told IndieWire in an interview, "Like most Americans, I had only a high school basic knowledge of Napoleon or the history of the French Revolution. I went off and read a short biography of Napoleon." Yep, that's the guy Ridley Scott hired to write his Napoleon epic. And goddamn it shows. Everything about this script is just so ham-fisted. The screenplay is also plagued by embarrassing dialogue. There's a scene where Napoleon meets the British ambassador and he shouts,
"You think you're so great because you have boats!"
I'm sorry, not even an Academy Award winner the likes of Joaquin Phoenix can sell writing that bad. Before you think I'm being overly critical, the dialogue did not go unnoticed by professional movie critics either. It's so bad you can't help but laugh. And when your script is called an unintentional comedy, you're doing something wrong. So let's just be honest about the script. It's dreadful. It is the work of an inexperienced writer with superficial knowledge of the subject matter who is in way over his head. Ridley Scott needed a top-shelf professional for this project, not a guy with 3 B-list flicks and some uncredited punch-ups under his belt. So how are we going to fix this? Well, we're going to start by tearing up David Scarpa's script. In case you couldn't tell, I see nothing to salvage there. In this video, we'll imagine that Sir Ridley has called upon yours truly to rework the screenplay. And there are elements of the 2023 film I'm eager to keep. The costumes, stunning. The sets, gorgeous. The cinematography, on point as always for Ridley. The soundtrack, immersive. In short, the production value is outstanding across the board. It's the story and the characters that we need to address. I would love to approach this rewrite with a totally blank canvas, but that's probably not fair. We're going to put some limitations on this project. 3 limitations. First, the length. We can only do this as one movie. No miniseries, no multi-season TV show, no trilogy of films. Sir Ridley is only giving me one movie. I'll beg him for a longer format, but let's just assume we can't get it. Second limitation. Based on what I saw last November, Ridley Scott must be interested in Napoleon's love life. Yes, of course, I'll advise him that that's not the most interesting part of Napoleon's story, and that he did not conquer Europe for Josephine's love. But for our project today, let's assume that we've been handed a firm note from our director that he requires a strong female lead. We'll give him one, just not the one he expects. Finally, our third limitation. We're going to assume in our rewrite that Ridley Scott wants to maintain the same portrayal and the same vision of Napoleon. He has his heart set on casting the 49-year-old Joaquin Phoenix, who is much too old for this role, and he wants to paint Napoleon as a loser. I mean, if you saw the 2023 movie, there's really no other takeaway. The movie is highly critical of Napoleon, so I have to assume that that's the take Ridley Scott prefers. He's the director and my new boss, so if he wants to knock the Emperor down a few pegs and deconstruct him, that will be our job. I'll try to persuade Sir Ridley to take a more balanced view, and I will plead with him to cast an actor at least 10 to 15 years younger than Phoenix, but for the sake of today's project, we've been told our new script must present Napoleon in a critical light to reflect Scott's own view of the man. All right then, it's a tall order with these limitations, but unlike David Scarpa, I have a secret weapon in my back pocket. I've read more than the Wikipedia page about Napoleon. And there is definitely a good story to be told, even with the 3 limitations Ridley Scott has placed on us. I'm going to build a traditional 3-act script around a strong cast of primary characters and secondary supporting actors. I'll weave in the themes that our director requires, but I'll do it in a way that builds a powerful through line. When moviegoers leave our version of Napoleon, they will know exactly what this film was about and the message being conveyed. Because, to be honest, when I walked out of the theater last November, I wasn't sure what I'd seen, and it was certainly not the kind of movie that sticks with you more than a few hours after you leave the cinema. It all felt kind of pointless. I think the critic from the National Review summed up my own feelings rather well. Napoleon is protracted, as if the running time and rambling narrative incidents amounted to substance. Napoleon parades an empty spectacle for a market uninterested in learning from history. Ouch! Our new script can do better, much better. Even so, I'm going to start by admitting that I do not have the skill to tell Napoleon's life story in a single film, and I don't imagine many writers could. So rather than hand Ridley Scott a smattering of cliff notes from Napoleon's life, I'm going to narrow my focus to find a compelling, tight story. The original film starts in 1793 with the French Revolution and continues through 1821 on St. Helena. Instead of covering 30 years, I'm intending to cover less than 3. But which 3 years do we pick from a long and colorful career? I think the choice is quite obvious. First, recall that we've been told Joaquin Phoenix is our leading man. At his current age, that pushes us into Napoleon's late career. Sorry, we can't have a 50-year-old guy running around Egypt when Napoleon was actually in his 20s at the time. Also, we've been told to deconstruct Napoleon critically, which gives us yet another reason to rule out his meteoric early rise to power. Given Sir Ridley's desired themes, Napoleon's downfall is the ideal setting to analyze his flawed genius. But where exactly is the best spot to jump into that timeline? The opening to our film needs to be a dramatic, exciting moment. And since we know that we're writing for Ridley Scott, we also want something highly atmospheric. Ridley loves his big visuals. But let's also remember our audience. The average moviegoer is not a historian. So we should open the film with something familiar, offering them an easy entry point. Finally, we want our opening scene to also serve a deeper thematic purpose, previewing something fundamental about our title character. Here's how our new script begins.
Exterior, Russian steppe, wind howls. A column of soldiers staggers through blinding snow. Dead horses and men litter the side of the road as snow piles against the bodies. A marching soldier pulls a threadbare coat around his snow-crusted beard. A shot rings out in the background. Men shout. More shots are fired and panic erupts. From a nearby wood line, Russian Cossacks explode from the trees. Riding forth with lances and pistols, they charge the tail end of the column in hit-and-run attack. French troops try to form a ragged square, but are cut down. Close up on a soldier being speared in the chest, thrown back into the snow. In the chaos, a general in a magnificent fur coat runs down the line towards the fighting. He shouts, "Rally to me! Stand your ground!" The general grabs a musket from a dazed soldier and takes charge.
The general in our opening scene is not Napoleon, it's Marshal Ney, one of our 3 main characters. Our story begins with the harrowing, iconic retreat from Russia. Ridley gets his blizzard moment, except this time it's historically accurate, and the audience gets a familiar, thrilling entry point into our tale. We get explosive, immediate action, but also the opportunity to introduce a contrast between 2 of our main leads. Marshal Ney is the soldier's soldier, a brave and loyal captain of the Emperor, fighting alongside the army's rearguard. Compare him against Napoleon, who is at the head of the army in a fancy fur-covered sled, eager to be the first man to leave Russia and race home to Paris. We can use a few scenes from the Russian retreat to establish key relationships and lay out the stakes for the film. Napoleon's army is destroyed. His control over Europe is now in question, and political plots against him brew at home. So immediately, we have the highest possible stakes in play, the fate of Napoleon's glorious empire hanging in the balance. This is a strong hook for us to open the film. Now let's talk broadly about Act 1 of our movie and the main story beats. We open with that retreat from Russia, as described, and we see Napoleon in a hurry to return to Paris and stabilize his rule. On his way home, he'll find time for a quick stop in Poland to visit his favorite mistress. In fact, in Act 1, I'm going to introduce 3 love interests for Napoleon. Sir Ridley wanted to focus on the role that women played in Napoleon's life, and will give him a worthy love triangle to dissect. Napoleon will show a different side of himself to each woman in turn, starting with Maria Walaska. His beautiful 26-year-old Polish mistress is only here for a brief cameo in Act 1 to alert the audience to Napoleon's unfaithful skirt-chasing ways. When we get back to Paris, we'll meet his first and second wives. Josephine will help Napoleon defuse political plots against him at home, as she proves herself an outgoing, shrewdly connected socialite. Lastly, Napoleon begrudgingly returns to his second and current wife, with whom he shares a young son. Maria Louise is 22 years old, timid and caring. The audience won't expect it, but over the course of the script, it's Maria Louise who will blossom into our third main character, as a shy girl emerging from Napoleon's long shadow. Okay, after we set the table with our love triangle, Napoleon gets to work in Act 1. The Emperor's legendary work ethic will be on full display as he crushes a clumsy coup in Paris and rebuilds his destroyed army. This is a critical part of Napoleon's personality missing in the original 2023 film. The man outworked everyone around him. He was a voracious reader, an eager student, and he slept only about 5 hours a night. We want the audience to know these strengths, in addition to his weaknesses. As you might now suspect, our story is going to focus on the years 1812 to 1814, the most pivotal 3 years of Napoleon's career, and bizarrely, a period completely ignored in the original script. That movie literally jumps from Napoleon's retreat from Russia directly to his abdication. That's worse than negligent history. It's criminally lazy storytelling, because you're skipping the biggest, best moments of drama in Napoleon's life. These are the defining years that determined his fate as French emperor, and they're filled with battles, betrayals, and plots. So now that you know the time frame of our story, here is the full outline of 3 acts with key story beats. The inciting incident of Act 1 is the disastrous retreat from Russia, and our rising action follows the A story of a political coup against Napoleon and the B story of Napoleon rebuilding his army for a fresh campaign. As we shift into Act 2, the political coup will be crushed, and Napoleon can focus on dealing with a new coalition of enemies. The turning point of Act 2 is the Battle of Leipzig. As you take a closer look at this outline, I want to discuss our 3 primary characters, starting with one of Napoleon's leading generals, Marshal Ney. Napoleon had 26 marshals of France, or top generals, and we obviously can't include all 26 of them. The original film goes out of its way to ignore every single one of them. These generals have fascinating stories and big personalities, but since we only have about 2 hours, we should pick one particularly compelling marshal to stand in as a representative character for all of them. Marshal Ney is my top choice for this very meaty, substantial role. Later, I'll mention one more marshal, who I think should have a supporting role. But Ney is the important one. We first meet him in the film's opening scene, an inspiring commander sharing the dangers of his men. Over the course of the movie, we'll see Napoleon take Ney for granted, berating him and stripping him of command in an explosive argument during Act 2's rising action, when Ney is defeated in an important battle on the eve of Leipzig. Napoleon rages against him as a scapegoat for his own failures in the campaign. In our largest battle sequence of the film, Ney will personally lead a massive cavalry charge. So again, I'm giving Ridley his heroic charge moment, but this time it's being led by someone more historically appropriate. Napoleon never led a cavalry charge in his career. As our story progresses through Act 2, Ney grows more disillusioned with Napoleon as the war drags on. The twist in Act 3 comes courtesy of Ney, who will abandon Napoleon's cause and lead a revolt among the officers. This stunning moment occurred on April 4th, 1814. It's an amazing, true incident that we will absolutely feature in our story. With Paris under threat and France teetering on the brink of defeat, Ney and many of Napoleon's marshals refuse his direct commands, betraying him and forcing their emperor to finally abdicate. Ney's arc is one of descent, from celebrated hero to scapegoat to disillusionment with Napoleon's insatiable ego. Napoleon just has this bad habit of driving away those who are closest to him. Speaking of the Emperor, we better outline his arc. In this film, we're going to get to see Napoleon at his lowest of lows, but also his highest of highs. In Act 1, we witness his selfish escape from Russia, abandoning Ney and the army behind. But we contrast that with his skill rebuilding a new army, inspiring young men and leading them into Germany to confront the Russians, Prussians, and Austrians in the largest battle of the Napoleonic Wars, Leipzig. In Act 2, Napoleon suffers a massive defeat, and he is deeply humbled at Leipzig. One of our secondary characters, and one of Napoleon's most enthusiastic commanders, the Polish Marshal, Prince Poniatowski, drowns tragically in a river safeguarding Napoleon's retreat from Leipzig. His death weighs heavily on Napoleon, and will use that to trigger a rare moment of self-reflection and doubt in the Emperor. Of course, the Battle of Leipzig also serves as our primary set-piece action scene for Ridley Scott to enjoy, anchoring the middle of the film. The defeat at Leipzig and the death of Poniatowski provide the necessary material for Napoleon's character growth in the second half of the movie. He's revitalized, re-energized, and he decides that he will lead his conscript army from the front, instead of delegating command to his dwindling pool of subordinates. Assuming direct command on the battlefield, he'll win a series of small engagements in 1814, defending France, but ultimately losing the war. His unwillingness to compromise leads to his final defeat and abdication. In case you're wondering, no, our film will not include the 100 Days or the Waterloo Campaign. Everybody knows that Napoleon's defeated at Waterloo, and he probably never stood a chance at remaining in power, even if he somehow had won that one battle. It's an anticlimactic ending to our new version of the script. Instead, we are going to end with Josephine's death back in France, and Napoleon receiving this devastating news while exiled on Elba. The film will end with the tease of Napoleon plotting his escape, even though we know as an audience that it is a doomed exercise in ego. Even in exile and defeat, Napoleon's ambition cannot be suppressed. He flies too close to the sun. Not only is he burned, but all those around him are burned as well. Napoleon's story is essentially a real-life Greek tragedy. Which brings us, conveniently, to our third main character, one of the only people in Napoleon's life not to get burned by his spectacular fall. And no, our main female lead is not Josephine. Josephine is a supporting character in our version of events. Based on his casting choice of Vanessa Kirby, we know Ridley Scott wanted a young, gorgeous woman in the film. I think Kirby was the strongest performance in the 2023 movie. But she's honestly far too young to be playing Josephine, next to a 50-year-old Joaquin Phoenix. If he's your lead, you needed an actress, at least in her 50s. Think maybe Renee Zellweger or Helena Bonham Carter. The fact that Josephine was notably older than Napoleon in real life is actually quite central to understanding why their relationship didn't work in the end. But luckily for Sir Ridley, in our new version of the script, he absolutely can cast an attractive young girl in his leading role. An actress around 20 to 25 years old would be very age-appropriate for Napoleon's second wife, Maria Louise. It will be clear in Act 1, through Napoleon's own behavior, that she's the third wheel, a political marriage of convenience. She's half his age and far more timid than the outgoing, strong-willed Josephine. Napoleon does not even attempt to hide his continuing relationship with Josephine from his new wife, which makes this love triangle fertile ground for an exceptional character arc. After Napoleon's crushing defeat at Leipzig in Act 2, Maria Louise offers to help her husband by mediating with her father, the Emperor of Austria. Napoleon won't take her seriously, but Maria Louise will take the initiative and help negotiate a potential deal anyway. His pride won't allow him to accept it, but her more active involvement propels the Empress into the spotlight as a political operator in her own right. Maria Louise will be our conduit into the frenzied politics of 1814 in the second half of the film. While Napoleon fights battles to defend French soil, we can parallel his battlefield desperation with her desperate diplomatic maneuvering to retain her husband's crown, or at the very least, her son's position as the future Emperor of France. The duplicitous Talleyrand, Napoleon's treacherous foreign minister, will be a supporting antagonist in our second and third acts. He's a formidable foe. And here, I do feel the need to highlight my favorite sequence of the original 2023 film. Napoleon's seizure of power is a tense, exciting sequence that gave just a glimmer of the kind of political intrigue and plotting that I would like to see more of in our reworked version of the script. Act 3 of our story is where the political machinations reach their boiling point, and in the end, both Napoleon and Maria Louise are toppled by Talleyrand, the betrayal of his marshals, and of course, the coalition of enemy armies closing in on Paris. Napoleon abdicates at the climax of the film, but when given an opportunity to join him, Maria Louise hesitates. Finally, after years of devotion to her unfaithful husband, she becomes her own woman, and she chooses a life separate from Napoleon, out of his shadow. Her character arc is complete. Exiled to Elba, Napoleon is alone. His ambition and ego have driven away everyone who's cared for him. His brother-in-arms, Ney, his first true love, Josephine, and his faithful second wife, Maria Louise, and their son. On Elba, Napoleon will learn of Josephine's death and of Maria Louise's decision to leave him. The man who once ruled Europe has lost everything. I imagine the final scene this way.
Exterior, Elba Island. Day. Dark storm clouds roll over a grey, angry ocean. On the rocky coast, Napoleon Bonaparte stands alone in his wool overcoat, staring intently across the horizon. Waves crash against the rocks. Close up on Napoleon, he closes his eyes. Off screen, the sound of footsteps on the rocks. A voice calls out, "Sire, shall we retire inside before the storm?" Napoleon opens his eyes. They are focused and resolute. "Retire? No, Major. There is work to be done."
Napoleon could never be satisfied. That is what drove him. That's what makes him utterly fascinating. And that is why our film will end with the Emperor still standing, plotting his return in his own mind. We don't need to see the 100 days play out on screen to know what comes next. Besides, Hollywood loves the possibility for a sequel. If you want to see a really good film about Napoleon, I'd recommend Waterloo, the 1970 classic with Rod Steiger in the title role. If you want to watch a good Ridley Scott film set during this era, check out his 1977 directorial debut, The Duelists. And finally, if you want to learn about the real Napoleon's life, take some advice from Joaquin Phoenix. When asked about his starring role, the actor smartly said this: "If you really want to understand Napoleon, then you should probably do your own studying and reading. Because if you see this film, it's this experience told through Ridley's eyes." Well said. Pick up a book. I'd start with this one by Andrew Roberts. He's the leading biographer of Napoleon still working today. And what does historian Andrew Roberts think about Ridley Scott's film?
How much of the film is, what in your terms, accurate?
Of the 2 hours, 38 minutes, I'd say 38 minutes.
Napoleon was a missed opportunity, and that hurts because it came from one of my favorite directors working in Hollywood. Ridley Scott dropped the ball on this one, no doubt about it. Fortunately, we may get another bite at the apple from one of my other favorite directors. Have you heard about Steven Spielberg's potential miniseries, which is currently in development with HBO? His story is based on Stanley Kubrick's unfinished Napoleon biopic. That strikes me as a very promising project. Spielberg is known to be much more attentive to historical detail, and he's approaching this as a mini-series, allowing more time for the story to unfold. It's still way too early to know if this project will happen, but hope remains. Somewhere, out there on a desolate, rocky island, the Emperor will always be waiting for his return to the screen. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this lengthy video essay and indulging some of my unprofessional creative instincts. If you'd like to see our club wargame the climactic events of 1813 in the Leipzig campaign, you absolutely should check out our epic 3-part campaign event. Link in the description.